Before we begin, if you enjoy heartwarming stories about justice, kindness, and unexpected miracles, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Every subscription helps us bring you more emotional stories that remind us that kindness is never wasted. Now, settle in, because today's story begins with one tiny phone call that changed hundreds of lives forever. No one in the mansion noticed a little boy standing quietly at the top of the grand staircase. The adults were too busy arguing. The housekeeper was being fired. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't begging. She simply stood there with tears quietly gathering in her tired eyes while holding a small paper bag containing everything she owned inside the house. Around her, expensive marble floors reflected the angry faces of executives, managers, lawyers, and servants pretending not to look. Then something happened that no one expected. A 2-year-old child reached into the pocket of his tiny overalls, pulled out an old cell phone someone thought he couldn't even use, pressed a single button, and whispered just 5 words. "Daddy, please come home now." Within 45 minutes, black luxury vehicles rolled through the mansion gates. The billionaire owner had returned 3 weeks earlier than expected, and before sunset, every person responsible for firing the housekeeper had lost their job, but none of them knew the real reason she had been so important. To understand that, we have to go back several months. The Hawthorne estate stretched across nearly 40 acres on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind towering iron gates and centuries-old oak trees. Visitors often compare it to a palace rather than a home. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings taller than most apartment buildings. Rare paintings decorated endless hallways. Every room sparkled with perfection. Yet despite all its beauty, the mansion felt strangely empty. Its owner, 38-year-old billionaire Ethan Hawthorne, rarely spent more than a few days there. As the founder of one of the world's fastest-growing technology companies, his calendar was filled with international meetings, investor conferences, and business emergencies. Private jets had become more familiar than his own bedroom. After losing his wife Emily during childbirth 2 years earlier, Ethan buried himself even deeper in work. The only thing he loved more than his company was his son. Little Oliver Hawthorne had inherited his mother's bright blue eyes and his father's dark hair. His cheerful laugh could brighten even the coldest room. But lately, that laughter had become increasingly rare, because children don't measure love by expensive toys. They measure it by time. Although Ethan hired the best nannies, private tutors, pediatric specialists, and child care experts money could buy, Oliver continued growing quieter with every passing month. He barely spoke. He refused to eat unless someone patiently sat beside him. At night, he cried himself to sleep while hugging a faded baby blanket that had once belonged to his mother. Doctors insisted nothing was physically wrong. He misses emotional consistency. One child psychologist gently explained after weeks of observation. He doesn't need another professional caregiver. He needs someone who simply loves him. The advice sounded simple. Finding that person wasn't. Over the following year, more than 20 nannies came and went. Some quit because the mansion felt intimidating. Others couldn't handle Oliver's silent refusal to cooperate. A few treated the position like another prestigious job rather than caring for a grieving little boy. Eventually, the head of household management recommended someone who seemed almost invisible. Her name was Grace Turner. Grace was 56 years old. She had silver strands beginning to appear in her dark brown hair, gentle hazel eyes, and hands marked by decades of honest work. She wore plain uniforms, comfortable shoes, and never asked for attention. For 23 years, she had quietly worked in luxury homes across the city. Every employer described her using nearly identical words: dependable, honest, kind. Grace had raised 3 children by herself after her husband died in a construction accident many years earlier. Her children were now adults with families of their own, but she still worked because she disliked depending on anyone. On her first morning at Hawthorne Estate, she didn't begin by organizing schedules or unpacking toys. Instead, she walked into Oliver's nursery, sat on the carpet several feet away, and quietly started building a tower from wooden blocks. She never asked him to join. She never forced conversation. For nearly 20 minutes, she built towers, then knocked them down, built another, knocked it down again. Finally, Tiny footsteps approached. Oliver silently picked up one block, then another, without exchanging a single word. They spent almost an hour building colorful castles together. When lunchtime arrived, something remarkable happened. Oliver ate every bite, not because anyone ordered him to, because Grace smiled after every spoonful, as though it were the greatest accomplishment she'd seen all day. That evening, Ethan called from Singapore. "How did today go?" The head nanny sounded almost emotional. "Sir," he laughed. Ethan froze. "What?" He laughed, more than once. For several seconds, there was only silence on the line. Then Ethan quietly asked, "Could you put Grace on the phone?" Grace nervously accepted the call. "Mr. Hawthorne, I heard Oliver smile today." "Yes, sir. What did you do differently?" Grace hesitated. "I didn't try to replace anyone." "I'm sorry. He doesn't need someone pretending to be his mother. He needs someone willing to sit beside him until he feels safe enough to smile again." Those words stayed with Ethan long after the call ended. Weeks slowly turned into months. Oliver transformed before everyone's eyes. He began speaking in complete sentences again. He chased butterflies across the gardens. He proudly showed Grace every drawing he made, even the scribbles that looked like colorful storms. Every bedtime ended with the same request. "Miss Gray's story?" She always smiled. "Just one." Of course it was never just one. Sometimes she read 3, sometimes 4. Sometimes she invented magical adventures starring brave little boys, friendly bears, talking stars, and mothers who watched over their children from heaven. Whenever Oliver asked if his mommy could still see him, Grace never lied. Instead, she gently answered, "Real love never disappears, sweetheart. It simply finds new ways to stay close." The little boy would close his eyes, smiling peacefully before drifting to sleep. For the first time since Emily's passing, the mansion sounded alive again. Even the gardeners noticed. The chef smiled more often. Security guards greeted each other warmly. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once felt painfully silent. Grace somehow changed everyone without trying. She remembered birthdays. She baked cookies for maintenance workers. She left handwritten encouragement notes beside coffee machines before difficult mornings. Whenever someone struggled, she listened, not because it was her job, because compassion had become part of who she was. Yet not everyone appreciated the growing affection surrounding her, especially one person, Victoria Langley. At 43, Victoria had recently been promoted to estate operations director after the previous manager retired. Highly educated, impeccably dressed, and obsessed with efficiency, she believed emotions only complicated business. She considered herself responsible for maintaining discipline throughout Hawthorne Estate, and Grace was becoming a problem. Not because she broke rules, because everyone loved her. Staff members sought Grace's advice before approaching management. Oliver refused to spend time with replacement caregivers whenever Grace took a day off. Even Ethan began asking during weekly business calls, "How is Grace doing?" Each question irritated Victoria a little more. In her mind, employees should remain replaceable. No housekeeper should become indispensable. One afternoon, Victoria watched from her office window as Grace sat beneath the old oak tree helping Oliver feed birds. The toddler laughed so loudly that several employees stopped working just to watch. Victoria frowned. "This is a residence," she muttered, "not a daycare." She called her assistant inside. "I want detailed reports on Grace Turner." The assistant looked confused. Has she done something wrong? Not yet. But people with too much influence usually do. From that day forward, Victoria began documenting every tiny mistake. Grace arrived 4 minutes late after helping an elderly neighbor whose car had broken down. Written report. Grace spent an extra 20 minutes comforting Oliver after a nightmare. Written report. Grace prepared homemade chicken soup when Oliver caught a cold instead of requesting the chef. Written report. Individually, none of these incidents mattered. Together, Victoria intended to build a case. Because she believed rules mattered more than relationships. She had no idea that the smallest member of the household was watching everything. Little Oliver couldn't understand office politics. He couldn't read disciplinary reports. He didn't know what administrative review meant. But children notice something adults often miss. They notice kindness, and they notice when someone tries to take it away. One rainy afternoon, Oliver wandered into Grace's small staff room, carrying his favorite stuffed rabbit. He found her quietly looking at an old photograph. It showed 3 smiling children standing beside a much younger Grace. "Your babies?" Oliver asked softly. Grace smiled through misty eyes. "Yes, sweetheart." "Where are they?" "They're grown now." "Do they call you?" Grace hesitated just long enough for Oliver to notice. "Sometimes." The little boy climbed onto her lap and wrapped his tiny arms around her neck. "I'll always call you." Grace hugged him tightly, never imagining that promise would one day change everything.